The first thing I noticed when I entered the Grant family's penthouse dining room was that it smelled like money. Room, a vintage wine and entitlement cocktail made with foreign wood polish, and a long, polished mahogany table that stretched. The chandelier above flickered as if it were vying for attention, and it was wider than several residences. There were 11 seats in the room, and everything was set up precisely. Populated by individuals wearing well-tailored suits, practicing smiles and displaying generational conceit, Emmy the 12th, the outsider I. I sat down quietly as usual, and grinned courteously at my wife, Clara, who looked beautiful as diamond earrings that gleamed in every ray of light, and an expression on her face like the "she didn't look at me." But the world owed her a thank you. Her brother Mason was seated at the far end, already halfway through his second glass of wine. He was confident in a way that only comes from never being told no. On the other side of him, Charles sat at the head of the table, and Mother Lorraine wiped her lips with a linen handkerchief, her gaze hard and calculating. "To family," said Grant, who once shook my hand as if he were welcoming a charity case. He raised his glass in my direction. "To family?" he murmured, and everyone repeated it. I nodded, said nothing, and grabbed my Mason asked me for water. And the dinner began as usual with polite insults and fake interest masquerading as compliments. Lorraine inquired if I had found a job that pays in a field other than Hope, Clara, and whether I was still attempting the computer thing. Didn't speak. She didn't have to. Foie gras, quail, egg candy appetizers, I sliced tiny pieces of truffle that I couldn't pronounce, chewed them gently, and waited because I already knew this. Charles tapped his glass, saying, "It's not just dinner. You learn things when you live quietly. You hear what people think you miss. We've planned a small family custom before we continue. It's just light-hearted fun." He gave me a wink as if I was about to laugh when a hum started coming from hidden speakers, and then the lights behind them faded. The screen descended, brightened, and was expertly trimmed. Then it flashed deadbeat rejection laughter at a failed son-in-law who was unemployed and disappointed. Out of breath, Mason murmured, "Be careful." He could cry, but Clara didn't. She lifted her glass and sipped slowly, as if it were a toast to her improved life, despite her best efforts to conceal her sneer. After a brief moment of eye contact, Lorraine turned to face me with a practiced smile. "It was only a joke, sweet Charles. It's all in good fun, son. You know we laughed that deep, booming laugh of a man who had never had to ask permission. I enjoy you being here." I glanced at the screen once more. The words were clear and bold. Someone had actually spent money on this. Perhaps they even planned it weeks in advance, putting in so much work to make me look foolish. It's interesting. I looked down at my plate. I put my napkin on the table slowly. I got up without yelling. I responded, "Drama joke's over." And they hesitated, uncertain. Some of them continued to laugh, believing I would play along. I took my phone out of my jacket pocket, unlocked it, and tapped a folder called Evening. My thumb hesitated for a second, then I looked up and said, "Play." The screen flickered, and the laughter abruptly stopped. A new movie loaded, the slideshow paused, and the room became as silent as a pitch-black backdrop. Charles blinked when the white writing that said, "Welcome to the real Grant family," appeared. I didn't have to respond to this. The film started and Mason's footage played, clearly intoxicated, boasting to a bunch of investors at a rooftop bar. Even though his voice was slurred, the information was still understandable. "I don't care if it's against the law. Charles assured the zoning office that they would allow the property move, and we will unload the stocks after that." Quarter-clean house Lorraine's fork fell across the table, and gasps reverberated across it. Charles got up from her plate and turned that off. I held out one hand and gave a small gesture. He approached the wall control panel, but nothing happened. I turned it off hours before the video ended. Clara's voice filled the room as she played a recording from a spa room. Casually dismissive and nasty, he's nice, but in reality, he's only useful. He keeps my... Let me concentrate on the important things. Like her and her laughter now that my taxes are clean. Friends. He fits in with the furnishings, so sometimes I forget he's even there. After a moment of silence, I stood motionless and composed, gazing into her eyes, which were. Her hand trembled a little as she reached for her glass again, now pale and then set. It came back down, and Charles was enraged. "You're done. You realize this is treason?" I said with a small smile. "No, Charles. This is accountability." The film continued to play. The screen suddenly displayed phone logs, emails, and tax records, all of them authentic. Connected to each: backdoor transaction, veiled threat, and unspoken grievance. A concealed recording of Lorraine's voice said, "Differ the donation and move it through the education wing without anyone checking." They had made a spectacle out of my alleged failure, so tonight I watched all of those books without boasting or yelling. Offered them the truth in exchange, the screen went dark once more, and the projector turned off the lights so that the case could resume. Returned, and nobody chuckled. I glanced around the table and then at Clara, who had previously informed me that I wasn't suited for the limelight. Her lips opened, but she didn't say anything, so I put my phone back. Into my pocket. It turns out that I said I was simply checking to see if it was worth stepping into the spotlight before leaving. There was only silence coming from the table behind me, and they referred to me as fortunate. That was always they said. "You're lucky to be a part of this family. Clara chose you, and Charles allows you into his circles." They believed they were complimenting me each time they said it, but in reality, they were doing what they always did. The outsider, the man who married up, the man who reminded me of my place should be thankful. But let me tell you something. I wasn't fortunate. I was perceptive, but I didn't say anything because I was feeble. But I discovered early on that in spaces like theirs, quiet had greater power than they make noise if you talk too fast, and they become uncomfortable if you remain silent for too long. Clara was polished when I first met her at the age of 27, and that's where the cracks start to show. Lovely, with a smile that gave the impression that she had never experienced failure. I was already a few years into creating a platform that could compile and monitor intricate financial patterns in real time. A system I constructed primarily at night using data patterns from proxy shell companies, offshore leak databases, and public records. It wasn't ostentatious, but clever, practical, and risky in the wrong hands, something Clara didn't. She recognized promise, even though she didn't entirely comprehend it. She appreciated my desire, which I didn't crave. She said, "One night while sleeping on my chest, you're quietly powerful," which is uncommon in a male, and I believed her. A few months later, she introduced me to her family, and I became aware of how the Grants ran smiles like shark. They put people to the test in the same manner that you test a dog to determine how long it will take before it. Then Charles asked me to attend a fundraiser, saying it was the first test that came early. I arrived in a blazer and tie, while everyone else wore tuxedos. I was made fun of for this. Before dessert, Lorraine replied, fanning herself, "Oh, he's modest." Charming. With a hint of humility in the background, I always smiled, although that night something changed inside of me. I recognized that I was meant to remain thankful and small, not blend in. For a while, I went along with it. I worked during the day, met with clients behind closed doors, and developed code until my Clara complained about her mother's expectations, and how difficult it was to be the face of, she didn't know I had a heritage, so I listened and held her hand without interrupting. I had already obtained seed money from a foreign company, but I was unaware that I had an NDA with a military contractor, who didn't realize I was licensing my technology to a foreign financial regulator who desired access to my algorithm, to trace illicit funds across borders, and why she would never inquire further. Clara started treating me like furniture over time. Yet in the background, she would attend social gatherings. I volunteered to come nevertheless, but she refused, saying things like, "It's just business, you wouldn't enjoy it." "You don't have to prove anything. Just relax, love," she said, tilting her head. I overheard her talking to Mason on the phone one evening, and she didn't realize what she was saying. "You don't belong in those rooms." I was working late in the study with my headphones off when she said, "I don't care if he's quiet," from the corridor. "He's not even in the same league, but he's useful, okay?" she said. "Dad likes the way taxes look, therefore he's not dangerous." I didn't wince, so I took a breath. After that, I selected the hidden folder called Observations and clicked Save, began recording everything, including speech patterns, of which Clara was unaware. Mason was negligent, and she frequently repeated herself when lying to her mother. Charles maintained a burner phone in his office drawer, third from the top, and he reused the same passcodes for years. Years went by, and I never touched it. I merely replicated the data. I needed clarity, not retribution. Grew silently, with my name hidden behind holding companies and shell corporations. Had lawyers who fronted deals and partners who advocated on my behalf. Fame wasn't my aim. Clara never inquired as to why I stopped looking at her calendar or why I didn't mind. When she skipped anniversaries, she gave me the submissive houseplant because she believed I was finally fitting into the role. But I wasn't wilting, I was cheering. About 2 years ago, Clara's birthday was the event that made things official. We're all intoxicated, sunburned, and dripping with cash at her parents' beach house. Lorraine produced a present. When she got to the back of the photo album, she saw images of Clara's early family vacations and debutante balls. Clara and I were photographed on our wedding day, but my face was wiped out in red ink. That night I strolled down to my final performance, and I laughed too. The shore by myself and gazed at the lake. I recall contemplating about exposing them rather than going. I arrived to work and contacted Turner, my old boss, because I wanted a mirror and I wanted everyone to see themselves the way I did. We met for drinks with our MIT roommate, who worked in cybersecurity and is currently contracted by 3-letter agencies. He didn't even flinch when I put it out, so it was about time he said, "Let's burn them." It took months to collect everything, and I didn't want to hear them utter hurtful things. Instead, I wanted the type of proof that had legal weight, ethical weight, financial weight, misconduct recordings, transfers, and charitable donation manipulations. They made fun of me for everything from insider transactions to land exchanges, with fake signatures. Clara was the worst of them all, but it wasn't because she lied, it was projection. But the reason I smiled at dinner when they showed the slideshow was because she believed her own story. When I understood that they had no idea what I had, Soon-in-law's words failed, and he lit up in large white letters. The man in the corner was still visible to them, but he had vanished. Instead, what was seated at the table that evening was they. Gave me a purpose with their caustic jokes and scathing looks that they had made without understanding it. Sharper than any ambition, and the greatest thing is that I was given the stage. All I had to do was select the screenplay. Never openly state that the wealthy don't merely live, they act, and nobody ever played the parts. To outsiders, they were American royalty, superior to the Grants. Charles Grant, the iron-willed real estate tycoon Lorraine Grant, who made his fortune via strategic thinking, and low-wage work pageant queen, who became a humanitarian powerhouse and was able to knife a competitor while writing a check with one hand alongside the other Mason. The golden boy was lavished with titles and power like birthday balloons, followed by Clara, their dazzling daughter who attended Harvard and was highlighted in magazines as one of the most attractive ladies in Boston. With a picture of grace and perfection. Description: they were the kind of family that smiled for the cameras and made charitable contributions right before tax season. You wouldn't know it by looking at the cameras that were used to steal permits that destroyed affordable housing developments. I was the unintentional brushstroke that they attempted to cover up Charles, which was the flaw in their portrait. His lips were tight, his hand was hard, and he never looked at me completely when he greeted me. Called me Pal Champ's son in the manner that a waiter boss is called. Every exchange was recorded and practiced. Lorraine was more subdued, as if he was trying to check a social box by admitting my existence. After complimenting my tie, say that it was refreshing that Clara didn't wed someone from her own social circle. At events with qualifiers, she would introduce me to my son-in-law, who is incredibly lovely and ambitious, sweet like a well-behaved. Puppy and Mason, but not smart or successful, was simply unkind if Mason was the court jester with a trust fund and Charles was the king and Lorraine the queen. He drank excessively, toyed with everything that moved, and never shied away from a joke. "Hey, computer guy," he would even call me, "Fix my Wi-Fi, will you?" Everyone laughed when I got him an autographed Macallan bottle for his birthday, and I grinned at them all. Clara didn't say anything at the time, but occasionally she would grab my hand while it seemed too evident, although she was merely soothing a crying child. The devoted daughter and the supporting wife are the two positions that I am always torn between. Yet 3 years ago, they had the annual family gala, a sumptuous event that served as a media event. And they never forgot Christmas. Frenzy eye sculptures, orchestras, and foreign food. Clara donned a silver backless dress, gown, and grinned as though royalty had written her life's script. I remained close to the bar, where I always shook hands. Lorraine distributed personalized gifts just before dessert to guests who thought I was one of the caterers. Custom Charles received a bust of himself sculpted by Italian artist Clara, while Mason received a classic Rolex. Lorraine smiled and turned to face me after opening her diamond bracelet. "We didn't forget you, sweetheart," she added. She gave me a black velvet box that was too big for jewelry, which I cautiously opened. There was a framed picture of Clara, alone on our wedding day with the words "she could have" etched underneath it. Done better. Everyone laughed, including Clara, who giggled nervously. I made an effort to grin. Mom. My fingers clenched on the frame as I turned to face Lorraine. "That's funny," I whispered. "Isn't it?" She sipped her wine. Later that evening, I sat by myself on the balcony, feeling the chill of the wind against my face. The night something shattered inside of me, not because they made me feel ashamed, was while I was resting next to my Scotch glass. Occurred too frequently to be significant. Instead, what broke was the notion that they would ever cease. I could have constructed a tower, and even though I could have cured cancer, they would still refer to me as the guy who married up and claimed that I made a profession fixing Wi-Fi. They wanted to define me, not just make fun of me, and I couldn't stand it any longer, so I began gathering all of the birthday toasts that I missed and logging all of Clara's emails neglected to remove from her laptop. Copied every sarcastic remark, every indication of I wrote about every shady transaction Mason boasted about during inebriated dinners. At first it felt like petty retaliation, but once I realized the patterns, I became an archivist of their conceit. The foundation funds were transferred to overseas accounts, the internships Mason provided, and the bribery concealed under donations. He later eschewed Clara's backdoor interactions with her father's legal team in order to ensure that our prenuptial agreement had circumstances that benefited her in the event that I ever earned actual money. I came to the realization that it wasn't all jokes. I had married into something I didn't even recognize, and they were deadly now. You see individuals like the Grants. Think they're invincible since they've been correct for so long. They have parties with senators and play tennis with judges. Give to both sides of a political campaign so that they can attend the victory dinner regardless of the outcome. They had never seen a stick before, therefore they don't fear consequences. I didn't want to ruin them, because resentment. I'm not telling you that narrative. I wanted to break the loop and destroy the delusion they had created around themselves, since the Grants were brittle despite all of their gold and glass. The entire facade would shatter with only one decent fracture, which is why I didn't wince at every insult. I knew something they didn't, and I knew the curtain was going to rise when they played the slideshow at the dinner. They believed they were playing in the fall, but I was actually the one who wrote the last act, and I made sure the audience would be broad reporters, investigators, and silent adversaries who are waiting for the funds to fall through. For months, they have all been fed breadcrumbs. Clara once said that I was too sluggish to get up, but she was unaware of this, simply laying the groundwork more deeply than she ever could have imagined. Golden families are lovely to observe from a distance, but up close, you see that it's just gold leaf over rust, and I was done acting, not seeing it. The invitation arrived in the midst of a Wednesday with the subject, formal family dinner. Join us in celebrating. Sentences that appeared to have been polished by a public relations team before Clara sent them hit send. I read the message twice, and the font is as pretentious as the folks who wrote it. Once more, the phrase, "celebrate with us," was humorous when uttered by a lady who hadn't greeted me with a kiss in months, who had several bank accounts and social calendars, and if I was correctly interpreting her gaze, another life entirely. The invitation wasn't impulsive or random. It was bait. The final phrase, which was polite bait, said, "No surprises, be your best self," was the section that made me chuckle. It indicated that they were organizing something. The Grants never spoke without Clara's language, Charles's. Timing, Lorraine's RSVP delay, and her meaning were all as part of the production. They wanted me to appear and take the seat marked punchline I so they could act. They weren't the only ones, though. As I immediately said, wouldn't miss it for the world. 3 days before to the dinner, I met Turner in a small Korean restaurant downtown. I was dressed in jeans instead of a suit, hoodie, and an expression that suggested he already understood what I was going to say about Turner, who had spent the previous 6 months incorporating a tracking code into the digital shadows Mason's grants dropped Charles's real estate, Lorraine's server at her charity, Clara's emails and messages deal history. When you knew where to look, which we did, nothing was safe. People get lazy when they have power because they forget how vulnerable they are and assume that if they remove something, it's safe if they say it behind closed doors. But the world no longer operates that way. The truth comes out. Digital ones. And I had all of theirs time-stamped and backed up. The Truth About the Grant Family was the title of my folder, which I had prepared in triplicate after years of work. I traveled to a deserted office park on the outskirts of town 2 days prior to the meal, but it wasn't hidden inside. It was a password-protected, server-controlled safe location where we uploaded all of our files. I watched the progress. Indicator grow from 82% to 93% complete, not wanting to take any chances, and then I sent 2 prominent reporters a message with a timestamp and an anonymous tip. Proof attached. They would have everything 10 minutes after dinner began. I stopped playing games and started making a controlled destruction. At home, Clara seemed to be smiling more that week as she strolled around the condo as if nothing had happened. More than she had in the previous 3 months, as if she was excited to see me writhe at dinner. She even purchased, "This Friday I'm wearing a new shirt," she stated, carefully placing it on the bed. I nodded as I held the pricey charcoal gray fitted item in my hands. "You want me to?" She smiled at me, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're part of the family. Look the part." Sat with me and looked at the part I had been doing the entire time. Hadn't I been gazing at the portion of the silently appreciative, the man who served the wine and grinned at the jokes, was the husband of the outsider who was brought in and kept around for decoration. On the day of the event, I would be the mirror, instead of the joke when they wanted someone to laugh with. I donned the Clara shirt and carefully shaved and trimmed my beard to look sharp but not overdone. I buttoned it slowly and carefully, and it fit like if it had been embroidered by someone who believed that the image was everything. I felt peaceful when I looked in the mirror, but there was a change behind my eyes. I was no longer hiding anything. We entered the penthouse at precisely 7 p.m. The apartment was glowing gold, and the table Clara's parents stood with the glasses already adjusted and positioned with military accuracy. Mason stood off to the side, holding a glass of bourbon in one hand and grinning for a photographer near the fireplace. When he noticed me, he leaned in to whisper something to Clara, and she giggled softly. He had a cunning smile on his face and touched his arm. Everyone was watching except for me, or so they believed. The meal started off with small talk, with Charles boasting about Claire's clothing and Lorraine praising it. A new waterfront tower's zoning permission, I nodded as the small conversation went by. The potatoes gave me the appearance of belonging, in order to disarm me initially. Before the blade fell, soften the edges. Charles then tapped his glass immediately following the appetizers. "My dear family," he smiled. "We're celebrating more than just another quarter of dominance in our realm. Tonight, we thought, why not have a family celebration tonight? Family is the glue that keeps everything together." A screen fell from the ceiling, the lights dimmed, and I tilted my head slightly for a little fun while we were at it. Mason reached out as Clara's smile deepened and eyes flickered with expectation. I stood motionless for his drink with joy, and then it flashed failed son-in-law. Deadbeat, reject, unemployed, disappointment. The laughter burst out as Clara leaned forward and spoke smoothly, and Mason almost choked on his drink as expected. "Just a small joke, sweetheart." Charles's voice roared, "It's all in good fun, son." At that point, I got up, took out my phone from my jacket, and they had written a script, but I brought the revised version and searched up jokes online before the performance ended with a single tap. I just said, "Play." There was a little pause, but not quite stillness. Bewilderment. The tone had changed, but laughter still hung in the corners of the room like stale perfume. A few eyes I didn't flinch, didn't react, and just said a single word as a couple more darted toward me and then to the screen behind me. The slideshow of Clara and her humiliation. Play, and the room obeyed. The family's choreography vanished. The screen became black, and then the letters turned white, seemed strong and clear against the black backdrop. "Welcome to the real Grant family." It slammed into the room. Everyone froze, the fork stopped in midair, and the shoes were left unfinished. In the first tape, Mason's voice could be clearly heard over covert phone footage. He was seated at a high end. The camera position was subtly angled just enough to see the rooftop lounge arms stretched over the back of his chair like royalty. "So, yeah, I've got insider numbers on the Will Craftoft zoning deal," he said, pointing to the skyline in the backdrop. As he swirls his drink, Charles assures his companion that the permits will pass, saying, "We move quick, we double by Q2. "Isn't that illegal?" Mason asked, laughing. "No, not when you own." Charles dropped his knife with a startling clang when the individuals writing the rules gasps fluttered over the table. Clara moved her gaze between the screen and me as Lorraine sat straight upright, attempting to gauge how bad things were getting. Not yet, so they were unaware. The second video rolled, and this time the scene was more subdued. A spa room with dim lighting, and Clara's voice came first. "He's kind, but he's essentially invisible." A second woman chuckled, and her companion might be one of those superficial. Clara kept on without realizing she was being videotaped by the kinds who dubbed everything classic. "He's a nice tax write-off. I can't have a true power couple existence with him, but I can enjoy a quiet, devoted, and dull relationship. Possess equilibrium, you know. And then the actual gut punch, he's like a bulb fills." There isn't much laughter in the room anymore, not in the dining room, but this time from her side of the screen. Halfway up, Charles said, "Turn it off." I'm not sure what kind of stunt this is, but I raised a single hand. "No one is turning anything off," I muttered. and the screen paused. Voicecom even, "It streams from a remote encrypted server instead of operating from this room. Shut it down here, and it just keeps Charles. Try blocking it, and it will automatically send backups to the Boston Globe and all boardrooms." Grant ever entered. I saw Charles swallow that stinging reality like poison. Mason suddenly stood up and said, "This is," he continued in a cracked voice, "it's illegal that you're recording private discussions. Entrament." I slowly nodded. "With the exception of when you boast about crimes in public or when one party or when I own the business you're boasting about." Their expressions changed slowly in shock. The third film started with a presentation of documents, followed by shock and then fear. Lorraine's name was found in fraudulent charitable filings that were taken from the books of foundation costs. Almost every line item in the audio was her voice from a dinner party that was filtered through the literacy skills of the kids. Wing no one checks on the children. The screen briefly dimmed before a voiceover began. Turner's AI overlay, which was created for optimum clarity, was narrated by a woman. Based on financial records, over $3, sovereign $1 million were transferred to Shell corporations in the Cayman Islands via Lorraine Grant's education fund. Mason Grant's personal accounts, Lorraine, are closely connected to these corporations' holding companies. She appeared to have had someone go inside her chest and turn her, heart cold as she stood there. "This is a hit job." "No," I responded in a whisper. "This is well-organized, well-documented proof." Clara was pale, and everything you ever believed was invisible suddenly appeared in the light. She hadn't said anything since her eyes flashed to the hallway while her spa recording played, possibly thinking about leaving, but she was unable to move. The following footage was taken from a phone conversation between Clara and Charles that I had caught from a mirror 2 weeks earlier. "Charles, we must locate the gadget that Turner installed in their Martha's Vineyard estate via an unprotected router. Get him to sign a rewritten prenuptial agreement as a means of freezing him out. If he doesn't comply, we'll use the mental health card. I've already laid the foundation, Clara. He has been aloof, so I'll begin to plant the seed that he is unstable. Quiet guys always." The statement that took the breath away from the room was, "Make the best villains in court." I stared at. I never raised my voice at her, then not out of hatred but simply acknowledgement. I whispered to you that I never cursed at you or treated your family disrespectfully, even when, because I didn't host your supper, you all treated me like a decorative ghost and still intended to ruin me. Parties. Clara seemed to be trying to force this into a dream by blinking quickly, but it was too late. The video faded to part 1, ended with black again. Stay tuned. There was stillness, but not stunned silence. No one moved, so I dug into my pocket and felt the broken silence that lingers in your ears, like pressure before a storm. I said, setting the small black envelope in the middle of the table, which included affidavits from 3 testimonies from former Grant Holdings employees regarding intimidation, harassment, and unlawful accounting are already